Hello and thanks for joining Patrick and Elisa for the weekly astrology and spirituality overview show for week commencing the 29th of March. So as we make the transition from March into April, a lot of exciting news to tell you. Now, first off, we'd like to thank you for all your kind comments on the week 22nd show. And also in the mailbag, we've had some very interesting suggestions coming in. Unfortunately, nobody shared their birthday for this coming week. So if it's your birthday from week commencing the 5th of April, please drop us your time, date and place of birth underneath this video. And obviously I can then do a solar return for you for the following year and give you a bit of insight into your natal chart as well. So that's where we are. So in terms of your situation this week, Elisa, with the Hermetic wheels, where are we up to with that?
Well, let's pop that Hermetic wheel on the screen so we can just have a little look at where we're up to. So we're just moving out of that Two of Wands energy that finishes on the 30th.
Which is about initiation.
Which is about initiation. It was that first decan of Aries, so there was like a double initiation there.
Yeah.
And then as we move into this week, we're going to be moving into the second decan of Aries. So second decans typically are a bit more fixed, which is actually brilliant. Sometimes people can think fixed equals boring, but fixed actually equals stamina, strength, in it for the long haul. So
also, the second decan of Aries in terms of the astrology is of course ruled by the sun, the most powerful and obviously the life force of us all. So this is actually, if we think about it symbolically, the whole year, apart from when we go through perhaps the first decan of Leo itself, this is an incredibly supercharged week, potentially.
Well, I absolutely love that. And the pip card that symbolises this week is the Three of Wands. So we're still in that wandy, fiery energy. The Three of Wands is about new horizons. So it can mean travel. It very often can indicate a travel overseas, or at least daydreaming about moving overseas.
Oh, can you imagine the amount of people who are dreaming about going on holiday?
There's so many people, isn't there, that's really going to have missed out on that.
Meanwhile, back in the land of Arundel, what we're dreaming about is drinking real ale.
Real ale. So I think it is about feeling like the new possibilities, new fresh energy, getting out of any slumps that we've been feeling in, if we felt hemmed in, trapped, like we can't travel and move around. I do think this week will be, even if we can't do that, there'll be optimism for the eventuality of that happening. So yeah, definitely a fresh energy.
People are beginning to think, with the COVID numbers coming down in the UK, and I was reading this morning on the BBC website about the numbers were falling in Texas as well. Mm-hmm. But I'm very sensitive. I know on mainland Europe it is going up at the moment, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
But the other thing to say, in competition, if you like, with the furnace that is the sun, the second decan ruler of the sign of Aries, and the Three of Wands that Elisa's referring to, we do have Mercury and Neptune in a conjunction in Pisces for the first half of this week. And that's really quite complex because Mercury is in a detriment in the sign of Pisces. It likes to be clear and it likes to achieve practical returns from its rulership of Virgo, which is obviously the opposite of Pisces. And its rulership of Gemini is obviously about thinking, articulating our ideas. So when we put Neptune on Mercury, but in the sign of Pisces, one obviously is joyfully happy, Neptune, the ruler of Pisces, or one of the two rulers. Mercury isn't. So there could be something this week, in the early part of the week, where there's some confusion and misunderstanding, where it's difficult to get that clarity. We also must be aware that there could be some distortion, and that can go all the way to someone telling us a lie or being downright deceitful. But equally, we may in some ways kid ourselves, because that's possible with the energy of Neptune. So although we've got that furnace energy coming through, and also the sun in Aries continues to be in a very close alliance with Venus, and is forging a very constructive and anchoring angle to Saturn, which is the co-ruler of Aquarius, of course now back in Aquarius. And I feel that perhaps there was dialogue last week. Perhaps we were initiating things. Perhaps we were drawing good things to us. But also, it can be argued by some astrologists that the sun completely obliterates the energy of Venus. So from the full moon that occurred at the end of last week, and of course that was in Libra, any issue of justice could have been smashed by the force of the sun, and Venus being in detriment in the sign of Aries. And of course we've seen the massacre in Myanmar of protesters pushing back against the army, and I think about 96 people were murdered. So we can't talk ever glibly about astrology when we've got Venus very close to the sun. Personally, if we weren't going through COVID, and I think things were a little bit different in some parts of the world, I feel we are seeing there the tension of the square between Uranus and Saturn in a very brutal way. So what I think we're getting with Saturn is a degree of the good things, the good relating that's going on, where we are trying to get a greater kind of alignment between our own needs and the needs of others. So with Libra and energy, we can be too caught up with trying to people please. But also, by the end of this week, Mercury moves away from Neptune and it arrives in the sign of Aries on Sunday. And I think for a lot of us, this is going to be a critical moment, because with the fire of Aries, it's going to bring a much greater sense of passion, traction, forward movement, which has probably sort of slipped away a little bit with the kind of enervating vibe. If your nervous system has felt really run down, for example, if you felt weary, slept more, or weirdly had very vivid nightmares or dreams, that's very much to do with Mercury and Neptune. So I think Mercury moving into Aries will be very good for us all. There is a quarter moon, I should say, by the end of this week, which is in the sign of Capricorn, and that just suggests someone very traditional that we encounter may push back against something new that we're trying. But that energy is going to prevail into the week beginning the 5th of April, and I'll tell you more about that next week. But Elisa, so we've got the Three of Wands. We've seen that we've moved into the second decan of Aries, which is governed by the sun in astrology. What's the next part of the court cards in terms of the
Well, we're still in that Queen of Wands energy, which last week, if you remember, we were talking about that, saying that she is the feminine energy personification of protection. So we may feel a little bit still protective over either our own space or our kin in some way. I do think what you're talking about in terms of that distortion may be amplified as well by the just sheer loneliness.
I love amplification, that word. Yes, and that, of course, is not to love. And, you know, the way that people have been, if we think about the zodiac in terms of the houses, so each zodiac sign represents a house broadly. So Pisces energy, where Neptune and Mercury are, represents the last house. And the 12th house is very much to do with isolation. It can be to do with sort of guided isolation, where we may choose to withdraw, we may choose to work behind the scenes, we may choose to do research, we may choose to meditate, go into nature, have peace and tranquility. But also it is the 12th house, that of secret enemies. So it could be that people are isolating us, who don't tell us how they feel, they just don't talk to us. So what it's called, gaslighting?
Yeah, gaslighting or ghosting. Where you just don't get a reply, or, you know, a friend just sort of disappears from our life.
And Mercury is about communication. So if you put it with Neptune, and that smoke and mirrors a friend, Jane. I'd shout out for Jane Sturgeon, who's a psychic friend of mine who's absolutely brilliant, doing a fantastic job looking after her mum. Well, Jane said to me in a conversation yesterday, smoke and mirrors. Absolutely spot on. Kind of like distortion, something may seem to have some kind of substance, and then we go to put our hand on it and somehow our hand goes through it like a ghostly image. So so a bit of that this week, mixed with that need to want to protect our family or friends or someone that's close to us, could have a little bit of friction. But I think there is some optimism as well in that. Yeah, and I think the second half of the week really does talk to the possibility of things that have been bogged down, or if we felt anxious, or we felt, you know, sort of like a bit elevated, we can really get that furnace of energy that comes with the sun's help, and also the sun itself, the rulership of the sun of the second decan of Aries, but the sun and Venus still together in the second half of this week. But there's good old Saturn, which has got such a bad press, is actually angling to them at 60 degrees, a sextile, so very stable. So we may forge an agreement this week. We may have a discussion because Saturn's in an air sign of Aquarius. We have a discussion which has some kind of higher principle attached to it, which is what Aquarius is about. It's about concept of baptism. That is why we have the water carrier. It's about higher ideals. And so that link with Venus and the sun could mean that we really can see who we can count upon. So if someone has hugely disappointed us, we've been let down, we've been betrayed, there has been some kind of disappointment, there's been some kind of energy which is hard to feel you can see what it is because it's kind of unspoken. I feel in the latter part of this week we're going to see a lot more solid energy coming through. Now, because no one chose to share their birth details for week commencing the 29th, we're going to go to the mailbag, and the first one comes up from a really, really nice chap called Nick Hilton. And Nick...
Should I read his question out?
Yeah, read.
So, we've got a few questions for the mailbag, and bear in mind if you want to ask a question and it be included in the mailbag, please feel free to leave the comment and we'll
just
discuss it next week.
Say what you want us to talk about.
Yeah, so Nick is brilliant. His comment was very deep, but it also made us laugh as well at the end because it was, he's got a good sense of humour. So, he says, I recently had a major health scare, which dramatically there was a risk of me dying. But I had my yearly forecast and one-to-ones. And is it true that a astrologer can predict a death, or will the forecast just continue? The same goes for tower readings. How do you manage that if you ever see it? It's funny because I was thinking when I was in hospital, I'm supposed to have a really good month in November. I'm not going anywhere now. So that
bless you, Nick.
Really good question, Nick. Do you want to discuss it from the astrology first, or should I? Yeah,
astrologers, I think, would focus on it's not going to be down to one factor. So there are definitely Vedic astrologers, in my experience, tend to be much more fatalistic. So they will tell you yes and no things. Like, for example, if you've got Saturn on the dragon's tail, forget it in your house of relating or the fifth house of marriage. Forget it. You're never going to have a successful marriage. That's a very sort of intractable position, because if we think about it, as Nick's kind of intimating, we do have some choices. So even if the stars were configuring in a certain way, and the big ones obviously would be Saturn and Pluto, and of course it would depend on what houses they were impressing upon. So if they were going through the 8th natal house of someone's chart, or they were impacting on an 8th house cusp in their progressions, or their progress chart, or their directions, then yes, you could say that some kind of transition is going to go on. But who's to say this is the only life? Some of you will have your own views on that. But also, it's our choices. So it depends on what we eat and drink, how much exercise we take. It depends on if we're going to be reasonably sensible about how we cross roads or how quickly we drive our car. So we mustn't ever think that the astrology will have all of the answers, but there's no doubt about it in terms of fixed stars. If you put a fixed star that's quite difficult onto those 8th house positions, and you've got Saturn and Pluto in the mix, I think the potentiality to predict when someone's downfall or death would occur is definitely increased. But it still comes down to free will, doesn't it? Because we can choose to go walking every day to get those steps in. We can choose to get on a bike, or when there's not lockdown, to go for a swim. Or we can choose to drink modestly, or we can swig it back as if it's the last thing to do on earth, which, of course, Elisa and I can't wait to do once the lockdown's eased.
Everything in moderation.
But not for the first week.
But not for the first week.
So there are choices, Nick. And I think, definitely an astrologer could see when there would be the potential for that to happen. Would I say that to somebody? No, because I feel that peace of mind is a very important thing. And of course, some people may actually demand you tell them that. Say, for example, they had a terminal illness and they wanted some idea from the astrology, and they said, look, I want you to tell me this. I know I'm going to pass away, and I'm empowering you, Patrick, to give me that information. I think even then I would be finding it a little bit difficult. But if it was someone very strong, very clear on their desire to manage their exit from this planet, and you do, you know, I have a friend, Pete, whose father was very, very ill, and his father pulled out all the tubes from his body. He didn't want to live any longer. So there are very strong-willed people who decide when they want to leave the planet. So if I was dealing with a client who really impressed upon me their desire for me to tell them in a very fulsome way what their situation was, I'd have to really assess that based on how convinced I was of their ability to deal with any information I was telling them. Because for me, I try to not use the fear that people tend to put out there on the internet about Saturn and Pluto. You know, we've got choices, but they can also be very spiritual transitions. So, Nick, it could be about we're passing from one way of living to another way of living. You know, and that could be like a separation in a relationship. The 8th house of death is also the 8th house of money. So it could be where we decide to live our lives in a different way and let go of some income, so a death of an income stream, but the beginning of a new way of living, which may give us more time. So there's always a transition. At the end of every journey, there's the beginning of a new one. So that's how I would articulate it from the point of view of astrology.
I think that's fantastic.
What about the tarot?
I think tarot is a lot less mathematical. It's more of a personal development tool and a spiritual tool. So for me, there wouldn't be any definitive card that could come up that would make me think, oh, you know, something's going to happen. Obviously, there are cards in the tarot that are a bit more tricky. And it's combinations of cards as well. So if you pulled the death card
with the tarot,
that doesn't necessarily even, you know, depict a death. That could be a huge life change. It could be a breakup, or, you know, I know people that have, well, I don't personally know people, but I've read people that they've gone to see someone to do their cards. They've got death, the tower, and the world. They won the lottery, right? So there are definitely life changes that can happen.
But then I was reading on the BBC website yesterday about somebody who won the lottery and said it was the worst thing that ever happened to her.
Oh, yeah.
And this is life, isn't it? You know, we all have to react. Our relationship with ourselves means we react to our changing circumstances in different ways. So now she's saying, no, it just taught her about a lot of bad sides of people's human nature, including her own in some ways. She's been really honest. So she's actually grown as a person through actually having that experience, even though it brought some tragedies for her. It didn't bring all joys.
Yeah, and sometimes cards can reflect what we're feeling, which is why it's always quite nice to get someone from the outside to read for us, because when we read ourselves, I do believe that we can put some of that energy onto it. So for example, when my grandmother was passing away, she had a terminal illness, I would pull the death card. I would also pull the 3 of Swords, which is typically about loss and separation. And the 9 of Swords, which is typically about nightmares and fears of losing something or someone.
But it was also true.
And it was true, and that did happen. So the cards did reflect the situation.
It was apposite for where you were.
Yeah, so, I mean, I would never ever say that to somebody because I feel none of us actually know that. You know, we're not God. The only person that is God is God.
Brilliant thing to say. And when in my role doing astrology, because I'll be, you know, perfectly honest. Obviously, I'm giving readings to different people at different times. I'm always saying to people, look, I'm just a fellow traveller. You know, I may have certain insights to share about astrology. A lot of my clients actually know huge amounts of astrology. So it becomes a very mutual exchange. And like Elisa said, I'm just the sounding board, but it's their journey. And I'm always trying to be very respectful, not to adopt some kind of position of power over people.
Yeah, I think the way that we typically work is as facilitators. I think we both are that. facilitating somebody through a situation rather than being very directive or putting ourselves in a position of authority, because Patrick just said, we are fellow travellers. So for us, it's about facility.
Also, neither of us like being told what to do.
No, we do not.
I actually made that mistake last week. Apparently, I said 3 things on the trot. Could you do this? Could you do this? Could you do the other? But I didn't realise. And of course, because of Elisa's Scorpio energies, Mars and Pluto, it eventually came back to bite me on the bottom.
It did as well.
But yeah, so I think it works better if we work collectively, collaboratively with people. And that's really what I feel is required in society much more. Again, I was reading on the news earlier today that someone wrote this philosophical essay about the power of the internet giants and how much they have benefited from COVID. You know, and it's all smaller people, smaller individuals, smaller businesses that have actually been pulverized by COVID. You know, obviously Amazon sales are shot up. You know, Google's not making any less money, nor is Facebook, YouTube, and so on. So, interesting. So, in terms of any points you may have, any concerns you may have, any ideas, please drop them in the message underneath. Have you signed up for your daily horoscope yet? If you've yet to do that, please see the link below, because you can get it free to your email every single day. And the other thing to say to you is that I didn't do a full moon video, the Libra full moon video, simply because I ran out of time. I actually focused on the spring equinox, because to me that's very much about a whole year process, the return, the astrological return, solar return for the following year from that point, which was the 20th of March this year, which provided a backdrop, or provides a backdrop for this next period of time. So I did that video, and unfortunately we just timed out because we are still continuing our odyssey to try to epic odyssey to try to find somewhere to live.
Let's not hope it will be a Greek tragedy.
Indeed. And it's proven quite tricky, because where we want to go is a long way away. So of course you're driving, you're getting up very early to get there, you're whizzing around houses. It's a different country as well, in a different language as well in some cases. So yeah, it's a lot for us to deal with. So apologies for that. But the new moon video for Aries, I'd already done that. So hopefully you can check that out. Perhaps you could put that underneath.
Yeah, I'll pop the link under this.
Yeah, to let you know what's coming up in the middle of April. It's very exciting. It's on the 13th, but it does have the influence of the aforementioned Pluto. Ooh. So, are you going to pick a card? Are we going to do a thought for the week? Just to round off?
Okay. I think we should finish off then with an angel therapy card.
Okay, that's lovely.
Because we've had a little bit of a heavy chat there, and it was a brilliant question.
Yeah,
and I
thank
think,
you,
Nick, probably a lot of people would have had that question as well, I presume. So, okay, let's give it a shuffle. This is supposed to be a very spiritual moment.
Oh, sorry, I've got my big shoes on with the mounted toes.
Oh, you're taking us down to the circus. Oh, okay, lovely. The words on this card is sacral chakra. I hope you can see that. And it says you are highly sensitive to chemicals, additives, processed foods, and even energies right now. Respect your sensitivities by avoiding harsh items, situations, and relationships. We've got to protect ourselves a little bit.
It's weirdly Neptunian, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just saying, okay, we can't wrap ourselves in bubble wrap. And nor would we want to, because we wouldn't be living life. But there are certain things that we could maybe cut out or avoid just to nurture those sensitivities.
Or even reduce.
Yeah.
So maybe have a little bit of a treat.
Yeah.
I've got a very Neptune-dominated chart. I've got a grand fixed cross in my chart. So that means you've got 4 different quadrants that are all competing with each other in squares. Very complex, but Neptune's right on the ascendant. So, it squares up with my sun, it squares up with my midheaven, it squares up with my 4th house, which is to do with home and emotions. So, very complex position for Neptune. Someone else wrote in recently about how Neptune impacts on them because they have had issues with rashes and intolerances. So if you have a very Neptune-led chart, the chances are you'll be a brilliant psychic, very perceptive, but it gets difficult to protect ourselves from the energies of others when they're feeling more negative. We soak it all up. But in its higher frequency, absolutely amazing for listening to music, getting into nature, being very kind, loving animals, painting, being a crafter, being a spiritualist, being a psychic. All these things can be heightened beautifully by the positive side of Neptune. So what you're saying there takes us back to that Mercury conjunct Neptune.
Yeah, we've come full circle there.
You know, because Mercury rules the nervous system. So the first half of this week, perhaps be a little bit more careful about alcohol, any other toxins, and even, you know, everyday products. We were watching Grand Designs, the building show.
Oh yeah, I've been really into that.
It was a couple, and they had two boys who had allergies. And so what was amazing is the amount of modern building materials which make us very, very warm, but they have irritants in them because they have so many chemicals stuffed into them. So again, if you're a very Neptune-led person, the more natural an environment you live in, the better it's going to be. So if you wash all your food, if you're on a budget, if you can afford local or organic, better still, because you're getting the chemicals out of your digestive tract. So Neptune people have lots of gifts, but lots of challenges.
So something to consider. Yeah, let's be gentle to ourselves and try to be extra kind then to each other this week.
Oh, bless you. Well, I'm off to go and make. Elise got a lovely free-range chicken from Shrewsbury Market.
So we don't eat many animals, and well, I don't eat animals with 4 legs, but we do have birds, don't we?
Yes, obviously. Well, I'm going to make a French-style stew, so it will have lentils, celery, mushrooms, chilies, garlic, red wine. It will really be deeply seasoned with the chicken that's left over. And then I'll be serving that to Mrs. Arundel. Now, do you want rice or do you want pasta?
Rice, I think.
Okay, do you want white or do you want wholemeal?
Wholemeal would be nice.
Okay, so it's wholemeal rice, long grain, organic, and that's got lots of...
And being spoiled.
Because obviously that's got lots of, you know, goodies in it. And so I'll be making that for the next hour and a half while Lisa does the post-production on this. Have a wonderful week.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. And don't forget to click below to join, subscribe for your free daily horoscope. And take care from us both, from the A Movers.
It's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from her. Goodbye.